for no one. No one but me.
We dance to the drums of war, and all our hearts beat as one.
With the rise of the Underworlds expansion, we're introduced to two more pre-made starter decks, Stun and Wind featuring Leona and Yasuo, and Scouts and Skallywags featuring Miss Fortune and Lucian. This short video will look at a wide range of budget starter decks suitable for beginners to the game. The decks will either contain a large amount of cards from the pre-made decks, or a high number of common cards which can easily be obtained. So this is Legends of Runeterra Best Budget Decks Rise of the Underworlds. This video has been done in collaboration with BomberTV. Please remember to like and subscribe, and turn on the bell notifications too. So let's dive in. This is a budget upgrade to the pre-made Sun and Wind deck you get as a beginner in Legends of Runeterra. It features cards primarily from Targon and Leona, basically lots of followers from Targon and spells from Leona. Like many mid-range decks, it has lots of cards costing between 2 and 4 mana, and it's quite easy to build as it only contains a few extra cards on top of what you already get in a pre-existing Sun and Wind deck. This deck is mid-range, and it's both great at slowing down aggro decks as well as punishing slower decks by removing their blockers and dealing a ton of damage. The main win conditions are the champions, Leona and Yasuo. Leona is basically in this deck to stun units. She stuns the strongest enemy when she's summoned on Daybreak, meaning it's the first card you played in a round, and when she levels up, this effect is even upgraded one stage further, so she stuns the opponent's strongest card when any card, including herself, activates Daybreak effect, so you're going to be slaying a lot of people. This links in perfectly with Yasuo, who deals 2 to every enemy you stun and levels up once you've stunned or recalled 5 units. This deck focuses more on the stun element, so that's how you're going to basically meeting his level up criteria. Once Yasuo levels up, his effect upgrades one stage further, so he strikes a unit instead of dealing 2 damage to them instead, whenever he's stunned or recalled, which is going to be a massive upgrade as he has 5 damage without any buffs, so he's going to be able to take out most units when he does these strikes. Another win condition is Blade Twirler, especially when you give him Overwhelm thanks to Zenith Blade, as it can basically create a card with insane value, and the Overwhelm from Zenith Blade is going to basically turn him into a kind of one-turn kill tool. Blade Twirler gains 2 damage every time you stun or recall a unit. This means he can quickly gain lots of damage, but can easily be blocked by an opponent in normal times. So this is where Zenith Blade comes in. If you give him Overwhelm, he may have, say, I don't know, 14 damage from the amount of cards you've stunned, meaning it doesn't matter if he's blocked because there's going to be a huge amount of excess damage, and hopefully you can win the game that way. Since this is a champion-centered deck, we have lots of protection for them, like Deny or Notify, so that once they do get on the board, it's going to be pretty difficult to remove them. Deny negates a fast or slow spell, or even a skill. Notify is similar, but the budget version of it, and it only can negate the effect of a fast or slow spell that costs under 3 mana. The rest of the deck is basically filled with more stuns or Daybreak cards to level up both champions more consistently, and also helping them kind of the mid-range kind of purposes. So for example, you got Solari Sunhawk as an example of a card that kind of fits both of these themes. It has a Daybreak effect and stuns the strongest enemy on survival. Another random card could be Sneaky Zeebles. It's another way of stunning multiple enemy units and really kind of getting those criteria nice and quickly. In the mulligan, meaning basically cards you want in your opening hand, you always want to keep your win conditions, Blade Twirler, Yasuo and Leona. If you have them already, then look in the early game against kind of aggro protection tools against control, including Notify, which obviously only costs 2 mana. So overall this is a pretty solid deck centered around some very nice mechanics actually, you're going to have a lot of fun. This is a budget upgrade to the pre-made Scouts and Skallywags deck you get as a beginner in Legends of Runeterra. It features followers mainly from Demacia, but with several cards from Buildwater too, including the champion Miss Fortune. Like many mid-range deck, it contains lots of cards costing between 1 and 4 mana, and it's quite easy to build as it only contains a few extra cards that you won't have in the pre-existing Scouts and Skallywags deck. This deck has incredible curve, benefiting from all the great units you have from Demacia. On the mulligan, meaning the cards that you start the deck with, you want to keep Miss Fortune and Quinn, as in particular these are key to the strategy, but it's also important to have a 1-drop. Fleet Feather Tracker is a particularly good one that you can start the game with. If you cannot get 3 copies of Quinn, she can easily be replaced with Lucian, who comes in the original version of the pre-made deck. Both of these work around the same mechanic of doing lots of attacks, either via Quinn's Scout keyword or leveled up Lucian's Rally effect. You want to level up the champions as fast as possible, which is always where you want to attack with your scouts, even if they've died meanwhile. This includes scout cards like Grizzled Ranger and Valor, just to basically attack. You also have lots of great ways of generating value thanks to your tricks. You've got Ranger's Resolve to counter AoE, so area of effect spells that would obviously kind of wipe out lots of your cards all at once. You can get great value trades with single combat, taking out their key cards. And you've also got Riposte, which is a great way to shield a key card from removal and also deal bonus damage. This deck can go quite wide, meaning you have lots of cards on the field and be pretty aggressive thanks to cards like Petty Officer and Island Navigator. Petty Officer can obviously summon an additional 1-cost follower, and Island Navigator does the same but also grants his card Scout as well, obviously linking into the attack theme. It's also worth noting Relentless Pursuit can trigger the level up of your champion super early, as long as you have a Scout alive, so cast it on your opponent's turn so you get the additional Scout attack, potentially leveling up your cards on turn 2. Obviously your champions level up when you've done 4 attacks, so if you do a Scout twice on your first turn, then on the next turn you'd activate it on one of your own cards via Relentless Pursuit, which obviously gives you a rally, that you're going to be doing 4 attacks in 2 turns, so it's a very, very great deck, a very fast one, and definitely one to consider ranking with. Certainly it's one I've quite enjoyed over the past. This is Shurima Burn and features cards primarily from the Shadow Isles, but also features some of the new Shurima cards as well. It's a very follower heavy deck with 25 in total. Like many aggressive decks, the average card mana cost is very, very low, with every single card in this deck costing 3 or less mana. It's also extremely budget with no epic or champion cards needed at all. The idea behind this deck is to simply be very aggressive and in particular overwhelm your opponent with a wide board and later on burn them thanks to burn effects on the cards like Doom Beast's Drain effect or Phantom Pranks' effect where they deal 1 to the opponent's Nexus every time an ally dies. A wide board is simply a board where you have lots of different cards on the field. As you can imagine, every time you put a new card there, it adds to the wideness of your field. And burn simply refers to damage being done via effects or spells that damage your opponent's Nexus. You can have a very explosive turn 1 by starting with a Pesky Spectre into Ravenous Butcher and following up with a Dunekeeper for a total of 7 damage on turn 1. This is possible because both Pesky Spectre and Ravenous Butcher cost 0 mana, and you can spend your turn 1 mana on summoning Dunekeeper, who in turn summons a Sand Soldier as a part of its effect. So this is obviously one of the most aggressive turn 1s that are possible in the game, if not the most aggressive. Later on, just continue to summon units and go wide with lots and lots of cards, whilst your Phantom Prankster deals 1 obviously every time an ally dies. Blighted Caretaker kills an ally on summon to summon 2 saplings, so this is a super easy way of helping you get that wide board. The saplings are ephemeral, so they die at the end of the round or on strike, and this means you can deal lots of easy damage via Prankster's effect, as these saplings obviously die at the end of the round or on the strike, and obviously Blighted Caretaker you're going to be targeting a card to kill, so all of this really adds up and your opponent's Nexus health is just going to drain away. And finally, finish off the game with your burn spell, Ruinous Path. Ruinous Path is a fantastic new card which draws 1, and if you've slain a unit this round, drain 2 from your opponent's Nexus. So not only does this help burn your opponent's Nexus, but the drain effects on this and your Doom Beast will help keep your Nexus healthy enough to survive the game long enough to hopefully burn your opponent's Nexus to death. Obviously you're going to be very aggressive, so you're not going to be protecting any damage done to you, so any form of survival whatsoever is key to helping you win. And as you can probably see here, there's a common theme in this deck: everything leads towards damaging your opponent's Nexus with some sort of effect. This deck is Elise Spiders, featuring cards from Noxus and Shadow Isles. Elise Spiders is pretty much what you've already got in the Noxus Shadow Isles starter deck, with just a small tweakings, removing the bad cards and including more commons and rares which make this deck much stronger. The deck is aggro, meaning you'll be playing aggressively to finish the game quick. As a result, many of the cards have small mana costs, basically to have a stronger early game. As you can see, this is reflected by 33 cards costing 3 or less mana. The game plan is simple as you possibly can get in Legends of Runeterra. Just deal as much damage in the early game thanks to 1-drops such as Precious Pet and other aggressive early units such as Legion Saboteur. Then later on burn your opponent with burn spells such as Nox and Favor and Decimate. Burn spells are simply spells that deal damage for those who you're basically wondering what it is. I'm aware that lots of YouTubers use all these words and terminologies that just completely go over some people's head. If If you do reach late game, you have Captain Farron who can finish off your opponent with Overwhelm, and then the Decimate spells he generates when summoned. At this stage, your opponent should have pretty much very slim or small amounts of Nexus health left, so this is basically a win condition if needed. Elise should not be protected more than usual, just treat her as a normal unit. On games where she does level up, she can actually be quite strong, but again, don't be overprotective against her unnecessarily. Save your spells to take out your opponent's key units, rather than saving Elise. And I know this sounds a bit controversial, basically, even though the deck is named after her, but bear with me here. Focus on having a very good opening hand and mulligan heavy for 1-drops. If you are lucky enough to have 1-drops already, keep them and then mulligan everything else for 2-drops. Mulligan basically means searching for certain cards from your opening hand when you're given the opportunity to remove the ones you don't need, so this will obviously be doing right at the start of the game. It's important to get your opponent's Nexus health as close to 10 or even lower if possible, so don't worry about sacrificing units on attacks if this does lead to them dealing a bit of damage. When you do reach that endgame stage, then you can try and finally burn out your opponent with burn spells such as Noxus, Decimate, and Captain Farron, who I discussed earlier on. So overall, this is a very fast deck, both for winning and losing. So as long as your win rate stays above 50%, then you're good to go. This is Demacia Allegiance, or Mono Demacia, and this is one of the decks which has been staple for Legends of Runeterra in that kind of Demacia mid-range category. This basically means the deck revolves around combat with a strong peak around mid-game. This is actually a fairly aggro version of the deck with no cards costing 6 or more mana. This is a budget version and you can easily look at incorporating elite synergies by adding your Garen, or this can be upgraded to an even more mid-rangey version with cards such as Citria the Bold and Genevieve Elmheart. 2 fantastic exotic cards, and I would suggest removing your Screeching Dragons if you want to fit these cards into this deck. I want to point out that this is the budget version and is actually a starting point for a much stronger version of the deck, and it's actually performing quite well, and it has been performing quite well for quite a while now. The idea is to take as much value trades and gain as much value as possible, either in terms of the cards in the hand or crushing board presence. So basically this means getting preferable battle trades for those who aren't really familiar with what the kind of value trade term means. It's still important to get a good early game in the opener, but not as important as you have the tools to stabilise and regain the board control, either by recovering with Radiant Guardian, who has life steal when summoned after one of your unit's deaths, or punishing the opening attack of your opponent by casting fast spells such as Single Combat and Concerted Strike, which both involve striking your opponent's cards. This should be quite preferable for you, as your Demacia cards love combat and their effects and stats are suited to this. Then later on, you won't have trouble winning, but buffing your board with wide buffs thanks to Vanguard Bannerman or for Demacia, as well as pushing for lethal with the finisher, Relentless Pursuit. As your deck is suited to combat, this card triggers a rally so you can attack again, and you should have a lot of buffed up units alive thanks to Bannerman and for Demacia. So this deck is designed for basically introducing beginners to that mid-range strategy in Legends of Runeterra, which in my opinion is the most fun out of the 3 decks I'm going to be talking about in this video, and finishes like this are exactly why. This is Noxus, Piltover and Zaun Burn, which is another aggro deck. Many beginner decks are aggro as the cards are typically cheaper to craft and the playstyle is simple. Deal as much damage as you can, as fast as you can. Many control boss cards are usually exotic, making them more expensive to craft as a result. The budget rule applies to this deck as well, with a crazy amount of cards being common, 30 in total. It also has a reflective aggro theme with everything but Darius and Decimate costing 3 or less mana. With this deck you want to do as much damage as possible early on, then close the game out with burn spells such as Get Excited, Noxus and Decimate. You have plenty of ways to deal damage as well, with lots of units dealing direct damage to the enemy nexus with their effects, such as Imperial Demolitionist and Boom Crew Rookie. Other cards such as Legion Grenadier and Newscast Salesman incorporate burn damage via Last Breath. This means when the unit dies, or in Newscast Salesman case, his casks die, it will deal damage to the opponent's Nexus. So this is a nice alternate way to also deal burn damage quickly to your opponent's Nexus. Most of the time you should be able to win by turn 6 when you play a leveled up Darius and go for the winning attack. Darius levels up when your opponent's Nexus has 10 or less mana, which gives him a crazy 10 power once he does level up. One attack from him with his Overwhelm is usually enough to win, or at least put you in a very good winning position. Don't be tempted to use Mystic Shot or other removal spells on units. You need them to go directly to burning the enemy Nexus. There are obviously exceptions to this rule, but this is generally a pretty good rule of thumb to apply when using this burn themed deck. Again, this is a very fast deck and a pretty fun one to use too, but not so much fun for your opponent. I hope you like that pun. Frostbite midrange budget builds on a lot of the cards you receive in the Freeze and Decay deck as part of the login bonus. This is a variation of a meta deck that revolves around cards having 5 power and a Frostbite mechanic called Frostbite midrange, which consists of cards from Freylord and Noxus, unlike Freeze and Decay which has the Shadow Isles instead of Noxus. This is a budget version of the deck which is reflected with the high number of common cards, 21 in total, and no exotics, and is more themed towards the Frostbite part of the meta deck version. The main idea of this deck is to Frostbite enemies and level up Ashe as soon as possible, as she's basically your win condition. When she levels up, any unit with 0 attack will be unable to block, and this includes Frostbitten units. So Ashe already Frostbites a unit during attack, add in say a Harsh Winds on top of that, and your opponent will be unable to block most of the attackers, giving you a win condition. To get there, we'll use both spells like Brittle Steel and units such as Icefell Archer. Both of these cards utilise the Frostbite keyword. They both have a low mana cost, so you can really start the Ashe levelling up process very early on in the game. To get even more advantage from our Frostbite strategy, we'll use challenges such as Trifarian Glory Seeker and Rhymefang Wolf, basically to value trade the enemy units. Glory Seeker can challenge a unit with Frostbite to quickly take them out with its 5 damage, and Rhymefang's effect will instantly kill a Frostbitten unit regardless of their health. 2 fantastic cards in this deck. A good early game can be kicked off with Omen Hawk and Avarice Trapper, which can buff all the cards you draw, or you can draw a 5/5 Enraged Yeti respectively. So overall this deck really is good from start to end, which is obviously going to be your mid-range peak as it's a mid-range deck. So some pretty solid options, and this can easily be upgraded into the well-known meta archetype, Frostbite midrange. Jinx Aggro Budget is a budget version of the discard aggro deck which is currently in the meta. It features cards from Piltover and Zaun and Noxus and revolves around the discard mechanic. Lots of cards have a low cost with no cards costing more than 4 mana, and the only 4 mana card cost is your boss, Jinx. It is very budget with 27 cards being common and no exotic cards feature in this deck. The main idea of this deck is to be aggressive. We do this by taking advantage of the discard mechanic, both to draw cards and never run out of fuel, as basically most of the cards in this deck require you to discard a card to activate their effects. On top of this, many cards benefit from being discarded, so this synergizes perfectly. Cards like this include Flame Chompers and Jury Rig. Your ideal opening hand is basically summoning a Zorite Urchin, which effect discards a Jury Rig, which is in turn then summoned when discarded. This means you can deal 3 damage on your very first turn, which is perfect for this aggro deck, which is all about dealing quick damage. We also like to go wide, which means having lots of units on the field, and take advantage of Arena Battlecaster, which buffs all the units' attacks and goes basically in for that kill, so you can really deal quick damage in a very aggressive style. Later in the game, your opponent will start to defend themselves, and we can finish them off with burn cards such as Get Excited and Knocks Them for 4, which deals directly to their units or Nexus. Aim for the opponent's Nexus primarily, but aim to take out your opponent's key units if you feel this would be more beneficial. Your boss card is Jinx, who has quick attack to basically take out your opponent's units, and fits into the theme of this discard deck as she levels up when you have no cards in your hand, which is obviously going to be easier if you're discarding them all. When she's leveled up, she will help you draw cards each turn with her effect, which obviously you can in turn discard, and she also generates a super mega death rocket, which deals 4 to your opponent's Nexus and 1 to all their units. A very powerful burn card. Overall, a very consistent and fast deck which can be upgraded into the well-known meta archetype, Discard Aggro. This is Elise Burn budget, which features cards from Shadow Isles and Noxus. It's a very aggressive deck with all but 2 decimates costing 3 or less mana. It's a very budget with 29 common and no exotics, and has lots of cards that either deal burn damage, basically direct damage to your opponent's Nexus, or spider themed cards like the one your champion has in this deck, Elise. The main idea of this deck is to burn your opponent as quickly as possible, and you can accomplish this with lots of burn cards like Nox and Favor, and units like Doombeast. Elise can be quite threatening with all the spiders in the deck, which obviously makes her level up quickly. The spiders themselves work very well together, and a Frenzied Skitterer can be devastating on a wide board, where you have lots of units, and obviously all these spiders with the fearsome, your opponent just won't be able to block them. This deck has lots of very cheap cards, but also runs the risk of running out of fuel quickly, aka having no cards in your hand, and it obviously does this pretty quickly, which is why we draw lots of drawing cards like Glimpse Beyond and Stalking Shadows. Stalking Shadows is pretty great as we play lots of on-play cards which obviously have certain effects like Frenzied Skitterer and Doombeast. So these obviously have effects that activate when summoned, and Stalking Shadows can basically create more copies of them, so these on-play effects can be duplicated easily. After you've dealt enough damage in the early game, it's time to burn your opponent out before they can really do anything in the later game to you. Spells like Nox and Favor and Decimate can quickly do this by dealing direct damage to the opponent's Nexus. Overall, this deck is always very present with some extent of popularity in any meta, and although it's already fine by itself, it can easily be upgraded with some cards, but obviously this is really at the discretion of the deck builder. But you're never going to go wrong with any Shadow Isles Noxus deck, as they have a lot of really similar themes that work well together. And there we go guys, hopefully this is giving you new players or players with smaller deck budgets some inspiration for the types of deck that you can quickly build before you start basically building towards something a little bit more competitive. Always like making decks for beginners, so feel free to let me know if you've got any other suggestions of this kind of style deck, or maybe something completely different that you want to see. What is your favourite starter deck? I would love to hear in the comments. This channel is purely focused on Legends of Runeterra guides, looking at top 10s, best meta decks, budget decks, as well as predictions for upcoming patches. If you want more of this, you know what to do. The data presented here is analysed by BomberTV using MOBA Analytics. He's a Masters tier player with a background in game theory and game design. He took the most winning archetypes into Master tier, excluding ones with small play rates, analysed their key properties on why they are so strong. Link to his channel is in a pinned comment and in the card above. I've recently set up an Instagram account, @LoreGuides, and I'll be doing a giveaway shortly. Please follow this account for see posts about new videos, and will be in a chance of winning this giveaway. Please remember to like and subscribe, and turn on bell notifications too. See you next time guys.